utterly perverse in its lack of perversity. What it suggests is that sexuality in public should be confined to PDAs. That is to say, you can only express your sexuality in public if you're in a relationship. What they say is that porn is somehow not a part of one's sexual identity, although apparently a Prime Minister it basically constitutes it. What they tell us is that it's fine to have good, wholesome sexuality in public. It just can't arouse you. That is just bizarre, by the way. So, moving on to some refutation before I bring more substantive material in this debate. Let's take the case that Madeline introduced to the debate that was apparently so easy for the prop side to win. Ads made by men for men that demonise women. We would say that these are some of the very ads that feminist groups have launched intelligent and provocative campaigns to take down around the world. And we believe in the capacity of women to use their agency to fight against conceptions of their sexuality of men. In the exact same way they fought against the state's repression of their sexuality the last time the state decided to repress their sexuality. We believe in the capacity of women. We don't believe the response to objectification is to objectify women in discourse as well as through image. We believe that's incredibly damaging. We thought that some of the things that she said as well about sexuality were totally untrue, because while it might be the case that this certain type of douchebag advert, apparently made by lots of shoe companies, exists, we believe there are also ads for women. I think women and gay men in this room might remember those awesome Absolute ads with the Travis Clinton shirtless. That was hot, and we enjoyed watching that too. Objectification doesn't go one way, and by the assumption that the projected categories in this debate are children and women, something I find offensive in the first place, is damaging, because men engage in objectification as well, and so women engage in objectification as well, and should be encouraged to. And we think that's something valuable and new in public discourse, something that's only come around in the last 30 years, and something we don't want to retard by removing women's arousal from public space as well, when that's such a new concept historically. We think that's incredibly important. I didn't actually start my timer. So, and the other thing that was quite important, I was so angry. The other thing that they said was that porn wasn't part of your identity. We think that what you do while you're masturbating is an important part of your sexual identity, because you might be doing it alone, but it influences the identity that you then interact with in the public sphere. We think that is incredibly important. We don't believe that just sex that you have with your partner is the sex that's important to you, because part of your sexual identity is formed in response to death. It has to exist beforehand and be fully developed in that sense as well. We don't necessarily think that corporate filtering these values is different. I might be intimidated by people in public having PDAs, but why is it so different when their value of that expression of love is then photographed and sold back to them? We think that was so weird, because it's not just sex that corporations sell to us, it's things like gender, like conceptions of race, like conceptions of class. And I expect and allow people to respond to those conceptions, especially when they have to have a ring of truth in them, otherwise we wouldn't be selling the product in the first place. I now want to go on to this with my substantive material, but first.
So your argument is that the solution to the objectification of women is to also objectify men?
Yes, because we believe that objectification isn't necessarily bad. The viewing of someone's body as something that you want to fuck, that is the expression of lust or arousal, is not necessarily the thing we want to suppress, because this is an Iran. That just because it has any direction to the body, it's constant warm feelings within that body, we don't prioritize wholesomeness over filthiness. We think both are powerful expressions of humanity, which is why they belong with humanity before. What we believe is, obviously, men have overstepped the mark in the way they portray women. Obviously, there has been demeaning portrayals. We're not going to deny that. But the removal of all forms of arousal isn't the best response to that, is what I said in my refutation. Because what I'm saying is you confine sexuality to, shop-selling porn, which has traditionally been a male context for the consumption of sexuality. We think that is very damaging. As I've said, you say that women can't respond to this. You objectify them again. And it's also true that just advertisements, or just this set standards for women. Often women set standards for women. Modelling set standards for women. The consumption of all kinds of products. The existence of beauty and that's valued in society set standards for women. We expect, and women expect to respond to those standards themselves by running campaigns, by dealing with that, and reinstating the argument about why they need to be valued. That's an important challenge to feminists, an important part of liberalism. The reason why I hope that worshippers don't worship in private, even though I'm not religious, is so I constantly redefend the idea that this society should be a secular space, that atheism is the right thing. We think that is an important part of the liberal pluralist sphere that is so vital. But also, we think sexuality is likely to get worse under their side of the house. Because now it's not something that's expressed in the mainstream, it's generically universalizing language of sexuality, but something that's very private, that appeals to a market of smut only, excluding that opposite conception of sexuality sexuality is quite dangerous. We also think that you're going to lead to the men that like those shoe ads to feel especially repressed, especially in backlash. They're not even going to make arguments to them now. You're not even going to tell them why objectification is bad. You're just going to stop them looking at the porn in the first place. Closing.
Right, but in the status quo, you're providing a particular dominant narrative to people as to how they ought to understand their sexuality. How does having that preconceived before you ever interact with another human being a good thing?
Because we believe that the rise of all forms of alternative sexualities, including on the online, which is a part of this debate, and through online pornography, is an example of the way that we have resisted dominant forms of sexual representation in the past. That we don't think that sexuality, as I've said, is the only way in which standards are set. We think that gender ads, even if everyone's fully clothed, can send messages about gender, which can form our gender identity before we've had time to consider that, in the same way that we expect people at that point to engage with it. Madeline said on this that, well, sexuality is different because it's irrational, which didn't make no sense. Because arousal might be extra rational, but it might have impacts on your rational identity in the future. It might later become a component of your identity. And just because at the time that you consume it, like we don't think that people watch magazines that contain gender messages, like as though they're deconstructing it, so they're post-structuralists. It becomes part of their identity as well, and we believe they have a right to do that. So, the other reason we think we need to have this, that we need to have, say, misogyny in the public sphere, is to chart society's progress on this issue. Madeline was right that this is a big problem, that it has been a big problem historically. And one of the most powerful ways that we can look at how society is improving is by allowing, for instance, female objectification of men to grow in society, female empowering representations of themselves to grow in society. We also need to send a damaging message about children in particular, that their sexuality is removed. I know myself that when I was discovering my sexual identity, the presence of arousing male images in public were quite useful because I wasn't comfortable doing that in private. And we think that's a powerful way in which children discover their sexual identity. Because while parents don't like to admit it, children do have a sexuality. Children do experience arousal, and it's incredibly confusing for them. And it's extra confronting when you tell them they should feel shame associated with that. What we stand for in this debate is not a rejection of the idea that some sexuality is damaging or some sexuality is offensive, but that reasonable adults and members of the public sphere have a responsibility to protect themselves and contribute to that sexual discourse, not to censor it. We were very proud to oppose.